Hello from my office here at NMMI in my uniform now. We last left off World War One for the world history students. And the recap briefly was who's involved, the idea of nationalism, the idea of imperialism, and the idea of a military industrial system that's all in place. The different nations that were involved, and what we're going to do is focus on the number three. Three nations, three leaders, in 3 weeks. And what I want to get into actually a little bit on the assassination. I'm not going to get any detail on that to you. If you want, you can ask me or send me an email, and I'll give you a little more on that if you wish. The one thing before I get into anything with the threes is that the one thing to keep in mind is when you look at World War One, the coming of the Great War, is the Europeans believed, the leadership believed specifically, that this was going to be a short war. Like me, it's going to be short. And the whole idea is why is the preceding wars. And the current war, the Great War, the World War One as we call it, is looked at with the preceding wars. And there were a couple of wars that preceded the Great War that Europe looked at as kind of a template. And one of them was, if you remember this, and I know you remember this from classes, the Franco-Prussian War. Very short, very quick. The other one to remember that I mentioned, and we talked about it briefly, is the Russo-Japanese War, 1904-1905. These are short wars. They should be quick, decisive, over with. That's not it at all. It's not true at all. Now, you had a few that recognized that this was going to be very different, but for the majority sense, it was a short war. The second thing to add into that is when you go through the literature, whether it's the Italians, because they had certain Italian groups, this group called the Futurist movement in Italy wrote about pride in nationalism and the use of violence. Heroism is the word I'm going to use in this sense, is that to go off on this great heroic adventure with your friends, with your pals, and later on you can tell your grandchildren about, the adventure, tell them about the medals you won. And that's always reminiscent to me, that wonderful piece of literature, All Quiet on the Western Front. And there's a host of others that gave this stern warning, hindsight, of this is a bad deal. Getting into war is one thing. Getting out is a little bit different. So anyway, the short war and the idea of the attitude of the period of time is important. But let's go back to the threes. Okay, Gallagher, you said three. Three nations, three leaders, 3 weeks. And what do we mean by that? The assassination of Ferdinand in June 28th, 1914 in Sarajevo, which Sarajevo is in Bosnia. And I sent you the maps, so you should be able to look at those maps. This is orchestrated by a group called the Black Hand. Okay, my statement, Black Hand. And so the idea is that this is going to have as a revenge motive to shoot Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austrian throne. This is perpetrated by a group of Serbian extreme nationalist terrorists in this book, in this sense. And the man who pulls the trigger eventually, the faithful, is Gavrilo Princip. Princip is a really interesting study, really interesting kid to look up. But I don't want to get too much into his personal life or his personality in some sense. But rather go back to the idea that the assassination made no sense when you look at it, when you dissect it. One is when you look at the assassination, it was this chance fate meeting, because the driver of the car that took Franz Ferdinand through Sarajevo as he was visiting and waving at the crowd ends up taking a wrong turn. And then ends up trying to put the car in reverse, and it stalls there, and that's where Princip will do the dastardly act. And because of this, this is the shot that's heard around the world in a way, pardon the American Revolution, but it's the idea that this is now, ground zero. However, the other thing about the assassination, which is always interesting when you read enough and you get into this, is that there were other assassinations of leaders of state prior to this. You had Carnot, a Frenchman, a French president who was shot and assassinated. You have Umberto, the king of Italy, that was murdered assassinated. And the one that was most striking is, for heaven's sakes, King Alexander of Serbia himself was assassinated in 1903, shot. So wait a minute. So what about this one? And once we go back to all of the powder, everything's around this, and it goes back to the threes. Um, Now you have Austria that wants satisfaction against Serbia for the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. And by the way, in a little passing, this was the dumbest thing for the Serbians to do. Just to be honest with you, the Black Hand to do, because if anybody felt obliged to Serbia and was going to help it, was Franz Ferdinand, for goodness sake. He was trying to make some kind of um, uh, uh, program renewals there. He was trying to do certain things to help out Serbia. Anyway, so when you get to this, the idea is now these three nations come into contact with this. You have the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you have the Germans, and then you have the Russians. All dealing with this idea of what happened in Bosnia, in Sarajevo, and the Serbians now are going to be punished by the Austro-Hungarians. And think of this: this is regicide, regicide, the elimination of a monarch, a regent. And so now all other regents are sitting there, all other rulers, the Tsar, one of them, and this is Russia, and they're appalled by this. They're not applauding the idea that assassinations going on. Think about it. These other assassinations have been attempted too. They're not feeling too good about themselves. There's a good Onion article, if you like the Onion, about this. You can look it up about World War I. It's one of the funniest things I've seen, where all these regents are now running around, panicking about this, and they canceled the regent annual conference in order to do this. Kind of like COVID's canceling all these other things right now, and so these three nations, Germany, Russia, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, are all going to deal with the idea of what happened to Serbia. And the thought was it's going to happen quickly. We go back to Shorts, punish Serbia now, and that's the idea. And the Germans believe this is it. The Austro-Hungary is going to punish them. And what happens is, this is where you get into the problem of the 3 weeks and the three leaders. They stall. Austria-Hungary is going back and forth. The Austrian Empire confused about what exactly to do. What will this mean? The fear is Russia. What will Russia do? Will Russia respond? And the other thought is, where's Germany out of this? Okay, is Germany, with their great invincible army in their mind, going to stand behind us? And so you begin to see, besides the three nations, you see these 3 weeks, and this is now after going into July. So you have these 3 weeks in July that pass by, where you don't see anything happen. And now what's going to happen is Austria is going to write this famous ultimatum to the Serbian government, which is very strict and very harsh. And then at the same time, there's telegrams that go off to the German leader, the Kaiser, where Austria-Hungary is requesting support. What if Russia does come in? Are you going to be there for us? And this is the infamous blank check, as it's called, where the German administration writes back and says, you have the full support, complete support of His Majesty the Kaiser. And with that, this is good, because now here comes the Austro-Hungarians to lay the hammer down on the Serbians in punishment. But meanwhile, the Serbians have in their corner the Russians, and it becomes a deeper concern because of that region right. Russia is not going to support such an ultimatum against the Serbians. And the funny part, if you get into this reading with it, is the Serbians are trying to meet the demands, and they're doing this they're typing out the response to the demands, and the typewriter ribbon busts, and they're running around over there in Serbia in Belgrade looking for the typewriter ribbon so they can complete the response. All for the want of a typewriter ribbon in Serbia, I guess. Home Depot or Office Depot and Office Max were closed, I guess. You couldn't get these things, just like you can't get toilet paper or water now. And so for the want of it. So these 3 weeks go by where nothing really happens, and all of a sudden, as you get later into July, everything seems to happen. And now what you have is this other word called mobilization. The Tsar in Russia and the Kaiser in Germany, Wilhelm and Nicholas, Willie and Nicky, as they call each other, are writing these telegrams back and forth, asking each other clarification of what they're going to do. Are you going to sit on the sidelines? Does Austria have the satisfaction with Serbia? But Russia's fear is what Germany would do. and Germany's fear is what Russia will do. They both kind of get into this trap of the inevitability. It goes back to that military industrial problem. And what's added to this is the media. German papers, the Russian paper, they're all building this up. If we don't do something first, and this really comes back in a way into the German court, the ball comes back into the German court with Moltke, who has this idea of it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And if we don't go after the Russians now, well, 2, 3 years down the road, they'll be strong, too strong for us to take. This fear grips all of them, and this doesn't make it any better. And the Kaiser is really sitting back, allowing this to proceed in a way in the German military and with the German leadership. And Tsar Nicholas is being advised by another man named Sazonov. And Sazonov is rabidly against the Austrians. He has nothing very nice to say about him. And now you have the cocktail. Everything's in place. All this is mixed in. The assassination kind of becomes a backdrop for this, but it's not any longer the main thing. It is now the idea of the problem of these regions, the imperial design, the control of the Bosporus Dardanelles, which is vital to the Russians. The idea that the Germans are in tremendous fear of the Russians. The French are not outside of this. The French are upset with the Germans because they remember from the Franco-Prussian War, signing, and literally birth of their country right there in the Versailles Palace. And the English now have to sit and wait and look, but they're deeply concerned with the German, remember, the building, the military industrial design, the German building of the submarines and the Navy. And so all these things are in place, all because of the assassination. What should have been a localized issue, a localized conflict, is now webbed into this larger continental affair and will then become a world war. And so there's a tremendous lesson here. Don't let fear grip you and run you and ruin you. But the other part of it is really, patience, calmness, good advice. Okay, and I hope this makes sense. If not, please let me know. I will try to give you a little more. I'm trying to keep this short. I'm looking at the clock, and I apologize. It's this long, actually. Thank you. Good night.